There's an old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
For churches, that means finding the right people and building a strong team.
Easier said than done. So today we're talking with William Vanderbloemen, the CEO and founder of Vanderbloemen Search Group.
Basically, what they do is find the right people to work in faith organizations.
They've conducted more than 30,000 interviews over 15 years. They've extracted the data from all that experience. And so we want to know,
what are the skills that we should be looking for in young Christian leaders? And what are the skills we should be developing in ourselves?
And inversely, what are the red flags that we should all be on the lookout for? Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tools Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello, hello.
We're also joined by William Vanderbloemen, founder and CEO of Vanderbloemen Search Group. William, really pleased to have you on the show today. One of the reasons that we wanted to chat with you was thanks to all of the data that your organization has mined over the past 15 years or so. For the uninitiated, what Vanderbloemen Search Group does is basically finds the right person for your faith organization. And this has included work with Life Church, Mariners Church, Passion City Church. So my first question for you, William, is when you're looking to identify the standouts, what are some of your favorite questions to ask people?
What a great question. You should be in interviewing. You want to come work with me?
I've already identified myself as qualified for the job.
Yes,
Excellent.
nice.
You're already there. Well, actually, it's interesting. So first of all, every single church we work with is unique. They all say, oh, we're unique. And I used to kind of almost blow that off, but nope, they actually are unique. And then every job is unique. And so when we do a search, the first thing I'm trying to do, or our team is trying to do, is become a student of who this thing is. You say Mariners and Life Church, both fantastic churches, both huge, couldn't be more different. So the questions I'm asking are tailored around finding a tissue match between the candidate and the job, right? Like if you use old transplant imagery, if a search for for talent for your organization is kind of like saying we need a kidney transplant, right? And I've got transplant docs who are friends, and I've asked them what makes the best and the rest, and they say, oh, it's not the donor, it's not finding people, it's the tissue match, because you can put a healthy kidney into a healthy body, and if they don't match, it's game over for everybody, and that's no fun. And I think everybody's experienced a bad hire. I bet some of your listeners, what's more painful than hiring the wrong staff person? Hiring the wrong volunteer, because it's really hard to fire them.
Isn't that true?
So they don't. It's just hard. So my questions for candidates are tailored around what I'm looking for. Having said that, as a general rule, what I've found, I've been doing this for 15 years, started the company. We now have 45 people, and I'm the least qualified to do a search. So I do things like this. I write, I speak. Occasionally, if it's one of our longstanding friends like a Mariners or a Life Church or one of the bigger ones that I've known forever, maybe I get involved. But here's how I'm involved, Brady. The search happens, like we're interviewing you, Brady, to come work in interestingly, we did a chief communications officer search for Mariners during the pandemic. That's got a whole lot of fun stories because it is the biggest communication shift in the last 500 years, which, by the way, I think if you study church history, means that we're about to have the biggest kingdom growth breakthrough in the last 500 years.
Reformation round two.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So we can come back to that, but I'm a firm believer that we're maybe on the edge of the best season of church ministry ever. But I ask, if I'm doing this search for Mariners, you've already interviewed with somebody, Brady. You've done the life story, the tell me about yourself, all the things. And here comes William. Hey, Brady, you don't have to do that again. Here's how I want to spend our time. I know Mariners. I know them really well. You're not going to offend me. I'm not your future boss. I'm not. So why don't you ask me whatever you want to ask me, and I'll just tell you the what's what. And, it's amazing how much you learn about somebody when you find out what questions they have. So while each search is specific, right now what I'm learning the most about from candidates is when I free them up to just ask a question, and it tells me a lot. It tells me how prepared they are. It tells me how much they've thought about whether they're a match. It tells me what they're nervous about. So that may sound like an evasive answer to your question, but I usually turn it around and let them ask me questions.
Yeah, no, there are three things that really stood out to me in that response. The first one being that the question maybe is not to the volunteer or to the potential person that you're looking at working with, but more to first yourself. And that resonates. We overly discuss with churches and on this show how important it is to understand your church's unique mission. We find that with larger churches, they're more understanding of their mission typically, and coincidentally, we did an interview last month with Life Church, and they were talking about a volunteer that they had in a spot that was not a good fit, and how what the team lead did was, because you can't really fire a volunteer, or it's tremendously difficult, as you mentioned, they moved them to a different ministry because that was kind of the best solution. But the first question to asking good questions to the potential candidate is to know yourself well. So what are the questions that our churches need to be asking ourselves to maybe identify what our needs are in the first place then?
Yeah, well, so the big question I think that churches need to ask right now, end of 2023, is what is our unique local context? And what is our call to every church's call is to fulfill the Great Commission, right? And most good church mission statements have some reflection of that in there, right? Something that echoes Jesus' commission before he left earth. So funny story. My church is right over here. I don't know if you can see the steeple over my shoulder. And my pastor told me during the pandemic, he's going to kill me for telling this story. Please don't post this to anyone at St. Luke's United Methodist. He said, I don't know if anyone's going to come back to church, William. And this was in the middle of everybody freaking out and not knowing what was going on. I'm like, well, Tom, why? And he said, because now they've learned they can watch any preaching they want, anytime they want. And I can't compete with those preachers. The Furdicks, Chandlers, Groeschel, And I'm like, that really stuck with me. I bet there are a lot of pastors who are worried that now that everything's available to everybody, they don't stand out. The way you stand out is to preach about the 6 blocks around your church and what happened that week.
Yeah.
I've done, 30,000 interviews, 3,000 completed searches. I don't know a great pastor who isn't deeply in love with their local context. I think of my friend Jeff Henderson, who has the 4 campaigns. I'm for Houston. That's not enough anymore. Billy Graham used to say, I prepare a message with 2 things on the table, the Bible and the day's newspaper. Well, how does today relate to the timeless word? I think it's even more than that. I think it's Google News for your zip code and what happened this week in our local parish and how it relates to God's word, because I think that will help people know themselves better. The church I served in Houston as a senior pastor for a while, big church by Presbyterian standards, probably not the biggest by Texas standards, but 5,000 adults, couple thousand kids. So we could have done sort of the cookie cutter church growth thing, and somebody had the wisdom, not me, to say, what's our local context? Well, we sit in the middle of the medical center, largest medical center in the world. We have the people coming to the church, almost all of them not only had a bachelor's degree, but an advanced degree. And so you had a people and a context that were very interested in engaging the mind with the heart. So we flipped our whole mission statement to engaging minds and guiding hearts into a life-changing relationship with Jesus. And then we took our what are we going to do as outreach events or our invite a friend events, and we did, let's do science and faith forums. Let's do, brainiac kind of stuff that ties back to the gospel. And were we going to attract everybody in Houston doing that? No. But were we going to be in love with our very local context? Yes. So I think it's a pretty simple, I don't think it's about me giving you an answer. I think it's about me putting a question inside the listener's head, and that is, what's unique about your local context, and how can you touch that and minister to that? It's the way everything's going. Consumer goods, it used to be we all go to the mall. And then it was we all go to the strip mall. Now we all go to if we don't buy it online, we go to the locally sourced farm to table. Like in this zip code sort of stuff. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for pastors to, no matter what your communication skill level is, to hone in a way that no other person online can.
I was on my walk this morning, William, and I saw a tweet. And Alex yesterday was in Pittsburgh. He's having his second child next month. So he's on a little baby moon. Drove down we're here in Niagara in Canada, so he drove down 4 hours to Pittsburgh. And I know he went to some great coffee shops. And I was reading this tweet this morning. I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a new coffee shop where none of the baked goods are made with love. They're going to be made without love. Because speaking to your local context, like every time you go to a local, baker's, made with love. And someone quotes tweeted like, yeah, that already exists. It's called Dunkin'. So you mentioned that you weren't going to try to give me an answer. And I agree, because you haven't so far. I asked you, what should we ask our candidates? And you said, well, what should we ask ourselves? And I said, okay, what should we ask ourselves? And you said, well, what context are you in? Ask your local area about what it's like. So I don't know if we can move the goalposts anymore. I'm being glib. Those are great responses. I said there were 3 things that stood out in your original answer. That was the first. Where are we sourcing our questions from? And I think understanding our local context, that is historical, that is applicable to every church that's listening. The second thing that stood out to me in how you described your first response was this disarming question where you're like, hey, I'm not here to, fight with you. I'm not the one that you're going to be working with. I think that's tremendously useful because it allows for more open conversation. You go into a potential interview. It's stuffy. It's uptight. The nerves are high. If you can disarm people at the beginning, I think that's probably one of the most effective things that you can do to make the best use of your time. And then the final thing was, the delicate dance between the person that's hiring and the person that's considering being hired, or in this case, perhaps volunteer, where you're like, hey, I'm not going to ask you questions. You ask me questions, and kind of flipping it on its head. How could, if a church is not engaging the services of a search group like your own company, how could we accomplish that disarming attitude? Because a pastor or a person leading a team wouldn't be able to say, I won't be your boss. How can we get to that same disarming place? Because I think that's really crucial.
Super good question. Our logo actually has an origin story around it, but the second choice was just a Swiss flag because we're Switzerland. So we went with the origin story. It made more sense, but it is one of the benefits of using an outside agency or in some cases your bishop, or your district superintendent. There are still some structures that do that. How do you replicate that? I don't know. Here's the reality. I didn't realize till I had this job. Interviewing is a nerve-wracking thing for everyone. For the person interviewing, for the person. I go to Starbucks all the time. Now, I am the guy that all I have is a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. But I can't tell you how many times I see people in Starbucks looking at their resume, quietly mouthing out answers to things, like they're getting ready for an interview. It's just you so tense and tight. So how do you disarm that if you're not a neutral third party? Maybe, and this is going to sound like a broken record, maybe as the interviewer, you start to talk about what you're learning rather than asking what they know. Does that make sense? Like, oh my gosh, since we have come through this pandemic, I'm learning that our communication has to be like omni-channel now. Like, it can't just be bulletins for the old people and then the mobile app for the younger people. I got to think about, I don't even know what a tick or a talk is, but like, I'm learning there's so many channels out there, and I feel like I need somebody to teach me this. What would you tell me to make me, I'm scared that I'm going to be irrelevant. What would you tell me about how to be relevant in the communication game right now, given that there are just so many channels and so many different generations that I need to reach? See, now I'm asking you for help.
Right, and you're coming at it from that position of humility, which accomplishes, in effect, that same disarming thing.
Well, it has the added benefit of being true.
Yeah.
So it's not a made-up thing. But if you're asking someone to help guide you, that's a whole lot better than saying, can you pass my pop quiz?
Right. Yeah, that's so good.
And it lowers blood pressure. It lets people have more of a real conversation than the nerve-wracking interview. And, when blood pressure goes down, then people might be... Interviewing's horrible. Everybody puts on their best self and nobody sees the real self.
Yeah.
I tell people, not to get all like scripture quoting on you, but I tell people at our office, we're a lot of things in this equation that God's using us, but one of the things we are for both candidates that are interviewing and clients that hire us, I think part of our job is to make sure nobody walks down the aisle with Rachel and wakes up next to Leah. Like nobody, thinks they're hiring one thing and then gets another the next day. So for me, it's not about getting a candidate to say the right answer or asking the right question. For me, it's how do you disarm enough so everybody can take a clean, sober look at each other and decide if this is going to work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you have such a rich wealth of experience in having all these conversations. Like you mentioned, 30,000 interviews. Like that is such good data, honestly. And I think that affords you this unique insight into what the needs of churches are, and also what the needs of folks who are looking to work or serve in church are. And we've mentioned it already on the show. Like we have not only are we going through the biggest communication shift in the last 500 years, but culturally, globally, we've just navigated or are continuing to navigate a global pandemic for the first time in all of our lives. And so we're navigating this cultural shift. We've alluded to how that influences church. And so I want to ask you, William, based off your conversations with churches and folks who are looking to work and serve in church, how have you noticed the needs of one or the other, the churches or the folks looking to work in church? How have you noticed the needs of either of those groups of people change and evolve post height of this global pandemic?
Yeah, well, I think throughout the history of the U.S. labor market, there's been a pendulum that swings, and it swings where the employer has the leverage, and you just hope that you get hired, and then back toward the employee has the leverage, and the employer better do what the employee wants to make it happen. And you think about like the turn of the 20th century, the employer had all the leverage, and you put children in the factory and you don't have quality control over the products. Then labor unions come and it swings this way. I think it had been on the employer side. I think the pandemic pushed us to the employee has a lot more leverage right now than they ever have. So if you are interviewing for a job, if you can do everything you can not to come off as entitled, it's going to help you. Because employers are scared to death. They're dealing with another, I'm going to need this, this, and this. Here's one quick tip. If you're interviewing for a job, okay, volunteer doesn't really apply. Maybe some of the listeners are interviewing for jobs. Don't counteroffer. And I know that makes me sound like old curmudgeon, but like you could offer a salary. Now, if they offer a salary that's peanuts and you can't feed your family on it, then there is a way to approach that. But I think there's just kind of become, as much as I have a son who's a millennial, I have most of my office is millennials. I'm very bullish on that generation, even more bullish on Gen Z. But there's almost like a standard, I don't know if you've ever been to an Episcopal church where they say, the peace of the Lord be with you. And everybody says, and also with you. And then we lift up our hearts. We lift them up to the Lord. Right now in the job world, it feels like I make an offer of this number and they say, well, and here's this number. And it's like this sort of rote, I'm going to counter, we're haggling in a market, right? If you can avoid that, you'll get a raise quicker. Now, if someone's taking advantage of you, that's different. But do whatever you can if you're the employee to not sound entitled, to not try and push the employer around, because employers are scared to death and frankly a little fed up that people are just saying, well, I'm going to need 3 days remote and I'm going to need when most of your people you're talking to are employers who are really serious about trying to change the world, and your needs are not really their primary focus. On the employer side, if you're the one doing the interviewing, I think there's been a similar shift where we're realizing people don't have to be here anymore. They can live anywhere. They can get remote jobs. They can do hybrid work. I better come off as pretty compelling. So if you're the interviewer, the smartest ones I'm seeing are more and more laser focused on the mission of the organization. Here's what we're going to get done together and why it's eternally significant. And they're also more prone to go ahead and spend some money on creating a better workplace. Because if you're going to ask people to come in and not work from home in athleisure, then you better have a place that's pretty interesting to come to. So those are definitely shifts I've seen. We wrote a book in 2018 about creating an irresistible workplace and building a budget for culture and creating, good reasons for people to be there. it's sold okay. It's sold better since the pandemic because people are like, oh, we actually do need. So employer, think about your vision and articulate the why behind what you're doing, and talk about how you're building a great workplace and place to be. On the employee side or the person being interviewed, I think there's a real easy win here. Just don't sound entitled, sound honored.
Would you say that, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned employers that are kind of getting tired and even fed up with that type of attitude amongst the candidates that they're interviewing. I would love to hear more about what you're hearing, because that seems like something that you wouldn't share necessarily with your team, with those that you have hired, with those that you've considered hiring, but you might share those frustrations with a third-party group that you've, has a little more experience with that. And also, again, Switzerland, they can share that without feeling like, this might make me look bad.
Yeah. God bless the millennials. I love them, right?
Well, apparently not as much as Gen Z. I mean, don't think that we heard that, William. I mean, like, we're the millennials here, Alex and I. You looked right past us. This is Gen X all over again.
You know what, Brady? There are more of them than there are you. They're smarter than you. They're faster than you, and you better watch out because they're amazing.
Okay. That's fair.
This is what I get for telling him he wasn't answering my questions.
So, if you think about it, the millennial generation has never lived in a bear market. Like, they just haven't. It's always been a bull market. Unless they were born before 2008, which I think kind of, if they lived in the workforce in 2008, which would be not millennial, then they lived through a bear market. But most of their working career has been, next year's market's going to be better than this year's market. They've never lived through a significant war that involved our military as adults. Maybe the summers are a little hotter than they used to be. We can go there if you want, but the suffering.
We never had inflation, right? Like, my whole life, like, inflation, I didn't even understand it. My parents would talk about their mortgage. 13%. I was like, what does that even mean? Like,
yeah.
This is the first time I've ever even come to terms with, things can cost more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so, when you've had prolonged success, you can start to feel entitled. I'm saying as I'm wearing my Astros pullover, and we were in the playoffs for the seventh time, and right now we're getting our butt handed to us by the Rangers. So we're all feeling a little entitled. If you have prolonged success, you can get comfortable and start expecting things that are not your right. We expect to go to the World Series. That's not our right. We get hot at the right time, maybe. And I think generationally, there's something to be said there. It's not millennials' fault. It's just they've lived in a season of really prolonged success. And you can lose sight of the fact that, like, hey, you might not get everything you want from your entry-level job. It's not, it's not the way it's drawn up. There are going to be some parts of your job you got to do that you don't want to do so that later you can do what you do want to do. So I don't fault them for that, but there's a very real nervousness among employers that when you make the offer, you're going to get met with a list of demands. And then, and the problem with I used to just give everybody whatever they wanted. But then I had 12 people that all had 12 different arrangements with the company, and that's not fair. So in the name of fairness, there's a coding for what we offer and what we don't. And I just think a real easy win for a millennial interviewing for a job is to say, let's diffuse that fear right off the bat. Let's show some honor. Let's say, I'm excited to be here. Obviously, you can't be underpaid, but do what you can do to diffuse the myth that you're entitled.
Now, the other side of that coin, I was talking with a peer yesterday about this, hey, I'm a millennial. House affordability is not within the same realm that it was for my parents, the parents before them. And affordability is not quite what it was. And so I go to my grandparents' house and they say, like, well, why don't you have a home yet? Why don't you have kids yet? Why aren't you married yet? And I'm like, well, I mean, honestly, I can barely afford rent right now. So do you think employers are at all sympathetic to that side of things? Is it overblown?
100%. But, at our company, 2 years ago, was it? We did 9% across the board raises, which was basically just cost of living adjustment. But that meant our P&L needed to grow by 10% just to catch up. And just because they're the employer doesn't mean they can create money. So I think everybody's feeling it, and it's a really difficult time for a lot of people. But if you can, I'm yet to see someone who will go to work and do the things that you have to do to stand out in the crowd that don't end up promoted with raises, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to sound harsh. I mean, you got to take care of your family. You have to. That's your first parish. But if you can walk the tightrope in a way that makes you come off as someone who's excited to be at the interview, honored to be offered a job, it's going to separate you from the crowd, I promise.
Yeah, that leads to one of the other questions that I had, which is maybe transitioning the conversation a bit to, okay, I am a young leader. What are the skills that I need to be trying to develop in my own life to set myself up for success in the long term? One of them that you identify is likability, which feels related to this conversation. Thoughts?
Yeah. Can I tell a story?
Please, we love stories.
So ask, Brady, tell me, have you ever had, before I had this job, this has only happened to me a few times. You run into somebody, and maybe it's a social gathering, maybe it's after work, maybe it's at work, maybe it's in an interview. But you run into somebody, and within 5 minutes, you're like, this one is special. There's just something, it's an it factor, it's whatever you want to call it. There's something really unique about this person. I have wondered, like, I got a lot to learn. I'm trying to be a student, but I'm not super gullible. So why in 5 minutes does somebody have me convinced that they're amazing? And could you figure out how they do that, right? I've always wondered that. So we started the company in 2008. We've grown every year. A little asterisk beside 2020. No growth there. That was, but I think everybody's got some form of asterisk beside that year, whatever your thing is. During that year, we probably should have just closed. It would have been better to just furlough everybody and say, when things get back to normal, we'll reopen. We did downsize, but we kept people that we could afford because we had cash reserves. And we said, okay, we're going to serve churches. We're not going to sell anything. We're just going to serve. And like you guys, helping with the greatest communication shift, we were doing PPP seminars. We were doing, how do I do online church? I've never done this. I'm a traditional church that we wear robes and stuff. We still had time left over because nobody was hiring. All of our clients were closed indefinitely. And so during that time, we dropped back and we said, you know what? In a search, you hire us to find somebody. There might be, say you're hiring us for a tech director, right? Or a chief communications officer. There might be 1,500 people we're looking at. When you get serious, it's 100 or 150. And then you do most everybody knows this funnel. You do the initial emails, you do maybe a phone call, you do a quick video, maybe you do a Zoom interview. And then when we get down to the best of the best, the last 8 or 10, they get an in-person, face-to-face, long interview, okay? During the pandemic, we realized we've done 30,000 of those now, of the best interviews. Wow. So I'm back to this question. Why in 5 minutes is somebody... So I asked our team, could we figure out, even in those 30,000, who were the best of the best, the ones that had that effect on us, like this one's a winner? And so we did, because we keep maniacal records and track our data and all that.
Speak my language.
Well, actually, your language would be data, right? Isn't that the north of the border way of saying it?
But,
that is correct. Thank you.
Anyway, we were able to identify who these best people were. And then we said, do they have anything in common? And the answer was a very clear yes. And it was a stunning yes, because it wasn't anything I expected. Usually it's who stands out in the crowd? Well, the quarterback and the head cheerleader, right? Or the really smart people, or the ones who had the privilege of going to a great school, or the one who have fabulous hair and really shiny teeth, whatever the thing is. It was none of that. It was 12 habits that they all seem to practice that are all about human to human interpersonal skills. And it was amazing how common these practices were among what we called the unicorns, and how uncommon it was among the rest of the population. Once we identified the 12, we surveyed 250,000 people. and asked them about these habits and just started to realize just how uncommon they are among the general, normal, wonderful people and how common they were among the unicorns. Now, here's the coolest part. Every one of those 12 habits is learnable, teachable, coachable. And so it means, if you had a roadmap to these 12 habits, you could stand out in the crowd. So that is a long-winded answer from a recovering preacher to your question, but we've discovered a map. There are 12 habits, and if you practice them, and it's on you to practice them. I mean, it's kind of like, I can sell you the treadmill, but that's not going to make you a runner. I don't know if you ever bought the fitness equipment and it ends up being a place for your laundry. True confessions. But, we have found the 12 habits that the people who rise up actually have. And if you're trying to develop yourself as a person, you should figure out how to apply those to your life. Likability is one of the 12.
Yeah, and I mean, Brady said it already. You're speaking our language, because that is so much of what we do here is just collecting data, observing behaviors, and deducing some conclusions about what the logical path forward is. And you alluded to it there. You've got a book on that very subject coming out called "Be the Unicorn," about those 12 data-driven habits. And so we've talked about the characteristics of a candidate for a job that it makes them be the proverbial cream that rises to the top of those 30,000 interviews. But I just want to ask you very quickly, the inverse, the other side of that coin. What are some red flags?
Oh, millennial talk.
Yes. But what are some red flags when interviewing someone for a job that immediately kind of raise concern and have those candidates fall down maybe to the lower half of the 30,000 interviews you've done? What are red flags you're seeing in candidates who are looking for jobs, opportunities to work in churches that are just kind of raising concern for you?
Well, when we talk about these 12 habits, we're talking about what makes the best of the best. The ones that, like the 1%ers, right? That stand way out of the crowd. So you don't have to practice all these in order to get a job. But I would say, what are the red flags? The direct antonyms of all 12 habits. Like, for instance, fast is one, and I probably should have titled it responsive. Like, the very rare candidate is the one who gets back to you so fast, you're like, golly, and with a human response, not a automated message from my iPhone, sorry, can't talk right now. Like, that's not a response. That's a click. So, like, real human responses. You want to get on my bad side? Don't answer my email. Like, major red flag. Some people view not responding to an email as a way to say no. It's not. It's just chicken. If you're going to say no, go ahead and say it. So just take the antonyms of all 12 of those habits, and that would be the quickest way for me to be like, here, 12 strikes and you're out, and there you go.
I do notice the non-responsive one bothers me. For example, I have had 2 calls this week with people that requested calls with me, and then they don't show up on the call. I didn't even ask them. Yep. They asked me. People will join a waiting list. I'll send an email. Oh, okay, you joined this waiting list. Here's the email. No response. I saw that they viewed it, and then I'll respond again, and I'll say, hey, there are a lot of people on this waiting list, man. If you just let me know that it's not for you, you joined it, that's fine. It's not a good time. Let me move to the next church. No response. And they saw it again, and I go, you know what? I don't like it.
Yeah.
When we looked at responsiveness, we looked everywhere. We looked at marketing. So you guys like data. So like, what inbound marketing is, like HubSpot or Facebook ads is part of that. I mean, it's kind of basically, how can I make my website something that makes people want to fill out a form and saying, I'd like more information, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody's done that, whether you're buying jeans or a car or whatever the thing is. So when someone fills out that form, it's a lead, right? Maybe for a church, it's I'm new to the area, I'd like somebody to contact me. If you grew up in church, the old visitor cards that were in the pews, that's the old OG of inbound marketing. No one ever messed with the visitor cards. And there was a massive study done of companies that use software, pay for and use software for inbound marketing. Here's the question they asked. Does how quickly you get back to a filled out form affect the likelihood of getting a phone call with that prospective client or member or whatever the thing is? Is there a correlation between speed and chance of talking together? And the answer was, if you respond to a form that's filled out within a minute, you have a 98% chance of having a conversation with that person. If you wait 20 minutes, you have a 60% chance of talking to that person. If you wait 24 hours, you have a less than 1% chance of talking to that person. So the punchline is, what was the average among companies that took this survey for their response time? And the answer was 42 hours. These companies that are paying money to generate leads just aren't following up with it. We called eHarmony, which is like the OG of Tinder. You know, I'm old, so I know what eHarmony is. But basically, it's lonely people that really want a relationship, that are on a website. How do I connect with someone? The response rate for those things when forms get filled out, it's just as bad. They don't get back to people. We're horrible at it. So if you want to stand out in the crowd, follow that habit. And like you mentioned, if you showed me the table of contents for this book, I would say, whatever, dude, I could have made up that list. And, fair. But this isn't my opinion about what makes the best the best. This is what the data shows. Even the data shows that is the way to stand out of the crowd.
I've been on the other side too. Like, I remember when we were looking for a landscaping company for our home, and bless the landscapers with their, HTML websites.
Right.
And I would fill out a form. I would call them. I'm trying to give you money. And 1 out of 5 would get back to me. And
Yep.
Also, quite curious. So both sides. Maybe I'm just different. I'm the outlier here that just wants to get back to people quicker.
You know what? As we're having this conversation, I'm realizing that this is really relevant to another arena that we talk a lot about here at Pro Church Tools, is how churches follow up with folks who are looking for a new church.
Precisely.
Or who are filling out a Connect card.
That's precisely the reason I picked that example.
Yeah.
And churches are terrible at it. I mean, like, you're talking to church communication people a lot. When I moved here to Houston 22 years ago now, it was right after 9/11, I came to serve First Presbyterian Church, so I had like 3 weeks where I was not a member of a church. I moved before we started work. And so we'd sold our house, and I'd made a little money on it. I was going to tithe on the money, and like, usually you give your tithes to the local storehouse. Well, I didn't have a local church. It's like, I got a cool opportunity here. What am I going to do with it? So it wasn't a ton of money, but it was pretty good money. And so I got it in cash, okay? And I divided it into 10 envelopes, and it was several $100s each envelope. And I went and visited 10 of the biggest, coolest churches in Houston. And I wandered around like an idiot, and like I was totally lost and dumb. Comes very natural to me. It worked out great. I filled out the visitor card. Remember, this is 20-some years ago. So, hi, I'm new to town. I'm searching for a church home. Here's my address. Here's my mobile phone number, which 20 years ago you didn't give out. Like, you got a mobile phone plan? That's interesting. Like, I would like to receive a call. Check. I would like more information on your church. Check. And then I would stick it, attach it to a giving envelope, and I'd put the several $100s in the giving envelope, and I'd just write the same thing on the giving envelope, and I checked a box that said this designation for this gift. And I said, this gift is for the sole discretionary use of the senior pastor. Now, having been a senior pastor, that would be interesting to me. Like, what is this the Unabomber, or is it something cool? But like, this is weird. Like, it should have, 10 churches, 1 reached back to me ever. Forget how quickly, ever. 1 reached back to me.
I don't
Lakewood.
get it.
It's not hard to stand out of the crowd. You just actually have to do it.
Okay, I want to ask more about likability though, because that one stood out to me. And looking through the rest of the habits, there was another one dedicated to just like being a good networker as the practical skill. And I got to be honest, those things don't come easy to me. And I am also a bit resistant to developing the skill from a pure pragmatic standpoint, because part of it to me feels like I'm augmenting my own like DNA and personality for the purposes of effectiveness. And we talk about effectiveness all the time, so long as it aligns with like who you are. And so I guess what I'm asking is, how do you kind of thread the needle of, I recognize likability is something that would prove useful, but also I don't want to pretend to be someone I'm not.
Yep. How do you be authentic and likable?
What if you're just not likable, William? I might not be that likable.
We have a lot in common. I'm particularly good at ticking people off. That did not make the list of 12, but I'm really good at that. I think what I found, Tony Robbins, polarizing personality, but a lot of his stuff is so good. And he has said for years, if you will focus your energies on helping others, you'll never run out of business. That's all. So like when you think of networking, there's the, kind of semi-slimy used car sort of personality. It's like, I know that, and I know people and we're connected. See, we've got so much in common. That's not connected. Connected is, oh, you've got a kid going to Baylor. I know the best family there, and they can point her toward some amazing low-cost options for meals and really get her to know. Would you like me to connect you to them? Because they love talking to new Baylor students and showing them something besides the silos in Waco. Like, that has nothing to do with me. I'm using my connectivity to help you, separate and apart from our interview, separate and apart from our work. That's an entirely different feel. So for me, it's a focus. I don't want to be likable so you like me. I'm going to focus on you and be curious about you, and that will create likability. One of the keys to likability is when you're talking to somebody to actually make eye contact. It is a lost art. I mean, I've got 2 kids in college right now, and they FaceTime. I would say us, but that's ambitious. They FaceTime their mother every day. And sometimes I'm there and get to say hello, but they love talking to her. They're just wonderful. I mean, what kid does that, right? Fabulous relationship. When they FaceTime, I'm looking at their nostril half the time. I'm looking, because they're looking off this way while they're FaceTiming. Like it's just not natural for people to look people in the eye. So here, really quick practical tip to being more likable. 90% of the population is right eye dominant. When you look at somebody to talk to them, look directly into their right eye. Nobody does that except for a handful of people, and it makes a difference. I don't know if you ever had a conversation with somebody where they say, he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. Mm-hmm. They're usually making solid eye contact. It's simple stuff that most people don't do, and it's focusing. It's not thinking less of yourself. It's just thinking of yourself less often, right? It's focusing on the other person. In one career stop I had, Brady, at First Presbyterian Houston, that congregation was made up of some of the most successful, influential people I've ever met. They were literally all the very best at what they did. And like my next door neighbor when I moved in, hey, what are you doing? I work in the medical center. Oh, what kind of doctor? I'm not a doctor. Oh, well, are you like an administrator? No. Are you like a physician's assistant or something? No. Well, what are you doing? I'm building a proton cannon that focuses on a particular tumor that's in the frontal lobe of the brain, a glioblastoma kind of thing. I'm like, do you have any competition? Like, how many of those are on the planet? He's like, well, there's one other one. I built it. It's in Boston. So it's those people, right? and I'm around these people, and I try to talk to them about them. Tell me what you like to do. Tell me about yourself. Tell me. The more successful the person was, the more likable the person was, the more quickly they turned the conversation back to me. Oh, tell me why you moved to Houston. I love to hear why people want to come to our city. Turn the conversation to the other person. Show genuine interest. Make great eye contact. And even if you're as unlikable as Brady and me, people will walk away saying, I like that guy. I like that guy.
Okay, this is revelatory for me because we've all heard the advice, look them in the eyes. I can't tell you how many times.
I hadn't seen your eyes yet, Brady.
I know, I understand. I apologize. The nature of this setup. I'm looking at Alex, and you're looking at the right side of my face. which for me, I am also right side dominant. The number of times I've looked someone in the eyes and I've been like, uh-oh, like what? Like you can't look in both eyes. How is it that I'm 32 years old and no one has ever told me, no, just look in the right eye? Revelatory. I also greatly like the focus on meeting the need of the other person. That is a great emphasis. That does not feel disingenuous to me. That does not feel like it's compromising in any way, like, oh, this is a facade to earn something. No, I'm just meeting needs. And of course, that is going to earn reciprocity in the other direction. Really final area that I'd like to discuss with you, William, as I continue to avoid eye contact with you, is we've talked about individual leaders.
I don't know if I want to talk to you anymore.
I understand. You've only got like 15 more minutes, and then the two unlikable people can go their separate ways. We've talked about individual traits, individual people. Of course, in church, we have to work alongside people. So we have to begin kind of assembling people with different strengths and different weaknesses. And I think that's where I'd kind of like to land the conversation, talking about, all right, we have this person, these strengths and weaknesses. This person, different strengths and weaknesses. We both want to serve the same congregation, serve the same local area. What are some of your best tips, hopefully something else that's revelatory for me, on combining and assembling a team to work together?
Yeah, so the least common of the 12 habits. Like, so we interviewed all the unicorns that we uncovered, and we asked, force rank these, what would be your top gift, what would be your bottom, that sort of thing. Far and away, the least common was self-awareness. Okay. It's also far and away the biggest blind spot of the people we interviewed. So 250,000 people surveyed. It was a long survey, but one of the questions we asked was, in each of the 12 habits, would you rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 3 being average? Are you, way below average, a little below average? Are you above average? Are you way above average? So where would you rank yourself on self-awareness? 91% of everyone ranked themselves above average in self-awareness. Now, I'm not like an applied math major, but I'm pretty sure 91% of any group is not above average. Like 50% are above average, 50%. So we all think we're great at self-awareness, and it's the least common of the gifts. So I think getting people to work together that are wired differently starts with growing some self-awareness. And for me, that starts with me. That starts with me. And what a fantastic age we live in to learn ourselves. Go take the Enneagram. It's worth the $20 or whatever it is. Go take the disc inventory. Have everyone on the team take the same thing and then read a book together so you can learn. Like, hey, when I'm communicating with Jen, I've got about 4 minutes before she's ready to move on to the next thing. Or learn yourself, and then as a team, learn together, and you'll start to figure out, I'm probably not as good as Brady at this particular job. His wiring is better than mine for this thing. Hopefully it creates some harmony. I mean, the reality is, part of living in a fallen world is we don't get along as well as we should. So I think there's always going to be tension. There's always going to be a rub until a new heaven and a new earth appears. There's a reason when Jesus is saying, what's the greatest teaching? Well, love the Lord your God. And by the way, get along with one another. Like it's huge. So grow your self-awareness. We actually, this is not something you asked about, but we had actually built a software tool, an assessment tool around the 12 habits. So you can figure out, what are my 3 top, what are my 3 bottom? And as a team, you can take it and see, where are we good, where are we not, and what can we work on? So know yourself and what you're good at and not. And knowing what you're not good at is not a sign of weakness, not at all. It's a way to figure out how we act as a body together, arms, feet, and so on.
Excellent. Well, what else do you want to plug? You mentioned the book. You mentioned the assessment tool. Where are the best places to find that and track down these resources if we want to explore more?
Yeah, well, so communication guys would get a kick out of this. I really didn't want to name this company after me. I bought 300 different domain names. I need to get in a recovery group. And I hired search engine guys to come in and say, which of these 300 do you want? We're not naming it after me. It's the 300. They come back after doing all their, dark arts or whatever and say, oh, good news, we got a clear winner. Bad news, it's your name. I'm like, we're not doing that. And they say, no. Your name is so messed up, Mr. Vanderbloemen. that you can misspell it in Google 100 different ways, and it will feed right back to this domain if we buy it and do it right. So, easy way, just try spelling Vanderbloemen into Amazon or Google. You'll figure it out. If you want like the website with the one-stop shop for the index and the book and some free stuff, theunicornbook.com would be the outlet to go to. So, and you know, let me just encourage you. If you guys who are listening today are serving the church, and your job description is basically other duties as necessary, because that's how it feels at the church, right? You got to get volunteers, and you are not alone, and you're on the front lines. And these guys and their byline of the greatest communication shift in 500 years is spot on in my view. And I think every single great kingdom breakthrough happens right after a communication breakthrough. So hang in there and keep doing what you're doing. My biggest plug is just a word of encouragement to you guys that are out there, you women and men that are slugging it out. I'm in the cheap seats in the kingdom. You're on the front line, and you're in a season that's going to make more difference than you can ever imagine. So just hang in there, and thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Great words of encouragement, William, and thanks to everyone listening for your time, attention, and trust. We'll talk to you real soon. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello, hello.
And we're also joined today by pardon me. We will run that again. I was already going straight to Vanderbloemen.
I know.
William. Yeah. Wrong European country. All right.